The cold bit through Fiona Montgomery's thin shawl like a hungry wolf as she knelt before the empty wood box, her hands trembling not just from the December chill, but from the realization that she might not survive the night. The cabin her late husband had built 3 years ago in the Nevada Territory Mountains above Belmont stood silent around her, the iron stove growing colder by the minute. And outside the window, she could see the first heavy snowflakes of what looked to be a brutal winter storm beginning to fall. She had burned the last piece of firewood 2 hours ago, and now the temperature inside was dropping so fast she could see her breath forming white clouds in the dimming afternoon light. Fiona wrapped her arms around herself and moved to the window, pressing her forehead against the cold glass as she stared out at the thick pine forest that surrounded her property. Somewhere out there was enough wood to keep her warm for months, but she had no axe, no saw, and no strength to fell a tree even if she had the tools. Her husband Thomas had died 6 months ago when his horse threw him on the rocky trail down to town, and she had been managing alone ever since, stretching their supplies as far as they would go. She had thought the wood would last until spring, but she had miscalculated badly, and now here she was, 23 years old and facing the very real possibility of freezing to death in her own home. The wind picked up outside, rattling the shutters and sending a draft through the cracks in the walls that made her shiver violently. Fiona moved back to the stove and opened the door, staring at the last few glowing embers as if she could will them to burn longer, hotter, to somehow sustain her through what was coming. But even as she watched, they faded to gray ash, and the metal began to cool beneath her hand. She had maybe 3 hours before hypothermia set in, she figured. Maybe less. She was considering whether she should try to burn some of the furniture when she heard the sound of hoofbeats outside, steady and strong despite the increasing snowfall. Fiona rushed back to the window and peered out, her heart hammering in her chest. In the 6 months since Thomas died, she had seen perhaps 3 people up here on this remote mountain property, and none of them in the last 2 months. The isolation had been both a blessing and a curse, giving her space to grieve, but also leaving her dangerously alone. Through the swirling snow, she could make out the shape of a horse and rider approaching the cabin. The man sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders covered by a thick sheepskin coat, his hat pulled low against the weather. He rode with the easy confidence of someone who had spent his whole life on horseback, and even from this distance, Fiona could tell he was a cowboy through and through. As he drew closer, she saw that he was leading a pack horse behind him, its back laden with what looked like supplies. The rider pulled up in front of her cabin and dismounted in one smooth motion, his boots crunching in the thin layer of snow that had already accumulated on the ground. He was a tall man, well over 6 feet, with a lean, muscular build that his coat could not quite hide. When he looked up at the cabin, Fiona caught a glimpse of his face beneath the hat brim, strong-featured and weathered by sun and wind, with a dark beard that covered his jaw. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most, and there was something about the way he carried himself that spoke of competence and self-reliance. Fiona hesitated for only a moment before opening the door, the desperate cold driving her to take the risk of inviting a stranger onto her property. The man was already halfway to the porch when she appeared, and he stopped, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect. "Madam," he said, his voice deep and steady. "Name's Fletcher Whitman. I was passing through on my way down from the high country when I saw your chimney wasn't smoking. Thought I'd better check to make sure everything was all right." "Everything is not all right," Fiona said, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely get the words out. "I'm out of firewood and the storm is coming in. I don't suppose you would know where I could get some." Fletcher's eyes, a striking shade of gray-green, moved past her to the dark interior of the cabin, then back to her face. She saw concern flash across his features, followed quickly by determination. "Madam, you need wood right now, not tomorrow. That storm is going to be a bad one, and you won't last the night without heat. If you'll permit me, I can take care of that for you." "I don't have money to pay you," Fiona said quickly, hating the desperation in her own voice but unable to hide it. "My husband died and I'm alone here, and I've been trying to make things last, but I miscalculated and now I'm in trouble. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be telling you all this, but I need help and I don't know what I can offer you in return." "I'm not asking for payment," Fletcher said firmly. He turned and walked back to his pack horse, untying a large axe from where it hung on the saddle. "I'm asking for permission to help someone who needs it. Now, you go back inside before you freeze out here, and I'll get to work. You got a woodshed or somewhere I can stack what I cut?" Fiona pointed with a shaking hand to the small shed attached to the side of the cabin. "There. But sir, Mr. Whitman, I cannot accept charity. There must be something I can do. I can cook you a meal or give you a place to sleep tonight out of the storm." "Then we have a deal," Fletcher said, shouldering the axe. "You make me dinner and give me a spot by your fire tonight, and I'll cut you enough wood to last the winter. That's more than fair, I'd say." Before Fiona could argue further, he strode off toward the tree line, his long legs carrying him quickly through the deepening snow. She watched him go, a strange mix of relief and apprehension flooding through her. She had been raised to be cautious of strangers, especially out here in the wild Nevada territory where law was scarce and men made their own rules. But she also recognized that without Fletcher Whitman's help, she would very likely die tonight, and that was a powerful motivator to trust. Fiona retreated into the cabin and closed the door, leaning against it for a moment as she tried to collect herself. Through the window, she could see Fletcher examining the trees near her property, testing them with his hand, looking for the right candidates for cutting. He moved with purpose and efficiency, and within minutes she heard the first solid thunk of his axe biting into wood. The sound was rhythmic and strong, echoing through the mountain air despite the muffling effect of the falling snow. Fiona listened to it as she moved around the cabin, gathering what food she had to prepare a decent meal. She had dried beans and some salt pork, flour for biscuits, and a small precious store of coffee that she had been saving for emergencies. If this was not an emergency, she did not know what was. As she worked, she kept glancing out the window, watching Fletcher's progress. He had removed his heavy coat despite the cold, working in just his shirt and vest, his movements powerful and controlled as he swung the axe again and again. She watched the first tree fall, heard the crack and crash of it hitting the ground, and felt a surge of gratitude so strong it brought tears to her eyes. He was a stranger, but he was saving her life, and she did not even know how to begin to thank him properly. The afternoon wore on, and Fletcher worked without pause. Fiona watched him limb the first tree and begin cutting it into stove-length pieces, then stack those pieces in her woodshed with neat precision. Then he went back for another tree, and another, his axe rising and falling with a steady rhythm that never seemed to tire. The snow was coming down heavily now, coating his hat and shoulders, but he did not slow down. If anything, he seemed to work faster, as if he understood exactly how urgent the situation was. By the time darkness began to fall, Fiona had a pot of beans simmering on the cold stove and biscuits ready to bake, though she had no heat to cook them with yet. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and ventured outside, her boots crunching through snow that was now several inches deep. Fletcher was at the woodshed, stacking another armload of split logs, and he looked up when he heard her approach. "I've got enough here now to get you through the night and then some," he said, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Let me bring some inside and get that stove going for you before you turn to ice." "You must be exhausted," Fiona said, noting the sheen of sweat on his face despite the freezing temperature. "Please come inside and rest. You have done more than enough already." "I'll rest when you are warm," Fletcher said simply. He gathered an armload of wood and carried it toward the cabin, and Fiona hurried ahead to open the door for him. He brought the wood inside and knelt before the stove, quickly building a new fire with the practiced ease of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. Within minutes, flames were crackling cheerfully, and blessed heat began to radiate into the room. Fiona stood as close to the stove as she dared, holding her hands out to the warmth and feeling the painful tingling as circulation returned to her frozen fingers. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how to say it properly, but thank you. You saved my life today." Fletcher stood and brushed wood chips from his pants, his expression serious. "You're welcome, madam, but I'm not done yet. I told you I'd cut enough to last the winter, and I meant it. Tomorrow morning, soon as it's light, I'll get back to work." "Tomorrow? But surely you need to be on your way. You said you were traveling through." "I was heading down to Belmont to winter there," Fletcher said. "Few more days won't make a difference, and I can't in good conscience leave you up here with just enough wood for a week or two. The way this storm is shaping up, you could be snowed in for months." Fiona felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I don't understand why you would do this for me." "You don't know me. I'm nobody to you." Fletcher met her eyes, and she saw something in his gaze that was both gentle and resolute. "My mama raised me to help people who need helping, madam. And besides, nobody should be alone up here in the winter, especially not a woman who just lost her husband. It's the decent thing to do, that's all." "Then at least let me feed you properly," Fiona said, gesturing to the stove where the pot of beans was now beginning to warm. "It's not much, but it's hot and filling." "That smells mighty fine," Fletcher said, and for the first time since he had arrived, she saw him smile. It transformed his whole face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger and more approachable. "I'll just tend to my horses first and bring my bedroll in, if that's all right with you." "Of course," Fiona said. "There's a small barn behind the cabin. It's not much, but it will keep them out of the worst of the weather." Fletcher nodded and headed back outside, and Fiona turned her attention to finishing the meal. Now that the stove was heating up, she was able to bake the biscuits, and she made the coffee, filling the cabin with rich, welcoming aromas. By the time Fletcher returned, stamping snow from his boots and carrying a worn leather bedroll and saddlebags, the table was set and the food was ready. They sat down together in the warm cabin, the storm howling outside and the fire crackling in the stove, and shared a simple meal that felt almost sacred in its significance. Fiona found herself studying Fletcher across the table, noting the way he ate with careful manners despite his rough appearance, the way he thanked her sincerely for every dish she passed him, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when she said something that amused him. "How long have you been on your own up here?" Fletcher asked as they finished eating. 6 months, Fiona said quietly. "Since Thomas died. He fell from his horse on the trail and broke his neck. It was instant, they said. He did not suffer." "I'm sorry for your loss," Fletcher said, and she could hear the genuine sympathy in his voice. "That's a hard thing to go through alone." "It has been difficult," Fiona admitted, "but I didn't want to leave the cabin. Thomas built it with his own hands, and it felt like giving up on everything we had planned together if I just abandoned it. I thought I could manage by myself. I thought I was stronger than I am." "You're plenty strong," Fletcher said firmly. "Strong enough to stay up here alone for 6 months. strong enough to keep going after losing your husband, strong enough to ask for help when you needed it. That takes courage, madam." Fiona felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire in the stove. "Please call me Fiona. After everything you have done for me today, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Fiona," Fletcher said, trying out her name. "That's pretty. Suits you." She felt herself blush and looked down at her plate. "And I should call you Fletcher, I suppose." "I'd like that," he said. They talked long into the evening, sharing stories about their lives. Fletcher told her about growing up on a ranch in Colorado, about learning to ride before he could walk, about losing his parents to influenza when he was 19 and striking out on his own. He had worked as a cowboy on various ranches throughout the West, never staying in one place too long, always moving with the seasons and the work. Fiona told him about her childhood in San Francisco, about marrying Thomas when she was 20, and moving to Nevada Territory with dreams of building a life in the mountains. She told him about the early days of their marriage, the happiness they had shared, the plans they had made for a future that would never come to pass. As the night grew later and the fire burned down to embers, Fletcher spread his bedroll on the floor near the stove, and Fiona retired to her small bedroom. But she found it hard to sleep, her mind replaying the events of the day, thinking about the stranger who had appeared out of the snow like an answer to a prayer she had not even known how to pray. She could hear Fletcher's steady breathing from the other room, and it was a comfort to know she was not alone in the cabin for the first time in months. When morning came, the storm had intensified. Fiona woke to find the world outside her window completely white, snow piled high against the cabin walls and still falling in thick, heavy flakes. She emerged from her bedroom to find Fletcher already up, the fire rebuilt and coffee brewing on the stove. "Good morning," he said, looking up from where he was sitting at the table, cleaning and oiling his axe. "Storm's still going strong, but that won't stop me from getting more wood cut. I want to fill that woodshed completely before I leave you." "Fletcher, you can't work in this weather," Fiona protested. "You'll freeze or get lost in the whiteout." "I've worked in worse," he assured her, "and I won't go far from the cabin. Don't you worry about me." Despite her concerns, Fletcher did exactly as he said. He bundled up in his coat and went out into the blizzard, and for the next several hours, Fiona heard the steady sound of his axe echoing through the snow. She busied herself with household tasks, mending clothes that had needed attention for weeks, organizing her sparse supplies, and preparing meals for the two of them. Every so often, Fletcher would appear at the door with an armload of wood, which he stacked carefully in the shed. Then he would disappear back into the storm without pause. By evening, when the light was fading and Fletcher finally came inside for good, Fiona's woodshed was nearly full. She stood in the doorway looking at it, overwhelmed by the sheer amount of work he had done. There was easily enough wood here to last her until spring, maybe longer. "I can't believe you did all this," she said as Fletcher stamped snow from his boots beside her. "This must be weeks' worth of work, and you did it in a day and a half." "I'm motivated," Fletcher said simply. "And I'm used to hard work. This is nothing compared to branding season on a big ranch." They went inside together, and this time as Fiona prepared dinner, Fletcher sat at the table and talked with her, asking her questions about her life and sharing more stories about his own experiences. She found herself laughing at his tales of ornery cattle and stubborn horses, of bunkhouse pranks and trail drive adventures. It had been so long since she had laughed that the sound of it startled her at first. The storm continued for 3 more days, and during that time, Fletcher stayed with Fiona in the cabin, working every day to cut and split more wood despite the brutal weather. He filled the woodshed completely, then started a second stack under the eaves of the cabin. He repaired a loose shutter and chinked some gaps in the walls to keep out drafts. He checked her roof for leaks and cleared snow away from the doors and windows so the cabin would not be buried completely. And in the evenings, they sat together by the fire and talked. Fletcher told her about the places he had been, the things he had seen in his travels across the West. He told her about his dreams of someday having his own ranch, a place he could settle down and call home. Fiona told him about her love of reading, about the small collection of books Thomas had given her over the years, about her desire to someday travel and see more of the world. With each passing day, Fiona felt something growing between them, something warm and undeniable that made her heart beat faster when Fletcher looked at her a certain way, that made her hands tremble when they accidentally touched while passing a dish at dinner. She had loved Thomas deeply, and part of her felt guilty for these new feelings. But another part of her, the part that was still young and alive and full of hope, recognized that Fletcher Whitman was a good man, perhaps the best man she had ever met besides her late husband, and that what was developing between them was real and worth exploring. On the fourth morning, Fiona woke to silence. The wind had stopped howling, and when she looked out the window, she saw that the storm had finally passed. The sun was rising over the mountains, turning the fresh snow a brilliant gold and pink, and the sky was clear and blue for the first time in days. She found Fletcher already outside, shoveling a path from the cabin to the woodshed and barn. She wrapped herself in her warmest shawl and went out to join him, breathing in the crisp, clean air. "Beautiful morning," Fletcher said, pausing in his work to look at her. "Storm's over." "Does that mean you'll be leaving?" Fiona asked, and she could not keep the sadness out of her voice. Fletcher leaned on his shovel, his expression thoughtful. "That was my plan. Head down to Belmont, find work for the winter, move on come spring. That's what I've been doing for the past 10 years, just moving from place to place, never settling anywhere." "But," Fiona prompted, hearing the hesitation in his voice. "But I've been thinking," Fletcher said slowly, "that maybe it's time I stopped moving. Maybe it's time I found a place to belong. And maybe, if you were agreeable to the idea, that place could be here." Fiona's heart leaped in her chest. "Here? You mean with me?" Fletcher set down the shovel and took a step toward her, his gray-green eyes intense and sincere. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few days. But Fiona, I haven't felt this way about anyone in my whole life. Being here with you these past days, talking with you, getting to know you, it's made me realize what I've been missing all these years on my own. You're strong and smart and beautiful, and you deserve to have someone here to help you, to protect you, to share this life with you. I'm not saying we have to rush into anything, but I'm saying I'd like to stay if you'll have me. I'd like to court you proper and see where this goes." Fiona felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I would like that very much," she said softly. "I haven't felt truly alive since Thomas died, but these past few days with you, I've remembered what it's like to smile, to laugh, to look forward to tomorrow. Yes, Fletcher, please stay. I want you to stay." Fletcher closed the distance between them and took her hands in his grip warm and strong even through their gloves. "Then I'll stay. And I promise you, Fiona, I'll take care of you. I'll work hard, I'll be faithful, and I'll do everything in my power to make you happy." "You already have," Fiona whispered. They stood together in the snow-covered clearing, the sun rising higher and warming the frozen world around them, and Fiona felt a sense of rightness settle over her like a blanket. This was not what she had planned. She had thought her chance at love died with Thomas on that rocky trail. But life, she was learning, had a way of surprising you when you least expected it, of bringing you what you needed exactly when you needed it most. Over the following weeks, Fletcher proved true to his word. He built a small addition onto the cabin to give them more space, fashioning a separate bedroom for himself so that propriety would be maintained while he courted her. He rode down to Belmont and returned with supplies, telling everyone in town that he was working for the widow Montgomery, helping her manage her property through the winter. The truth, of course, was more complicated and more beautiful than that simple explanation, but it served to protect Fiona's reputation while they navigated this new relationship. Fletcher proved to be an excellent provider. He hunted deer and elk in the mountains, keeping them supplied with fresh meat throughout the winter. He set trap lines for smaller game and checked them regularly. He maintained the woodpile, always making sure they had plenty of fuel for the stove. He taught Fiona how to shoot, patiently showing her how to handle the rifle until she could hit a target with reasonable accuracy. But more than just providing for her physical needs, Fletcher cared for her heart. He was gentle and patient, never pushing her to move faster than she was ready to move, always respectful of her grief for Thomas, while making it clear that he hoped she would eventually be ready for a new love. He brought her small gifts when he went to town: a book of poetry, a length of pretty fabric, a tin of good tea. He told her every day that she was beautiful and strong and brave. And Fiona, for her part, found herself falling deeply in love with this cowboy who had appeared out of a snowstorm to save her life. She loved the way he moved, with a natural grace that came from years of physical work. She loved his laugh, deep and genuine and full of joy. She loved the way he looked at her, as if she were the most precious thing in his world. She loved his integrity, the way he did what he said he would do, the way he treated her with respect and tenderness. As winter deepened and the snow piled higher in the mountains, the cabin became a warm haven of happiness. In the evenings, they would sit together by the fire, Fletcher whittling or mending tack while Fiona sewed or read aloud from her books. They would talk about everything and nothing, sharing their thoughts and dreams and fears with an honesty that created a deep bond between them. On Christmas Eve, Fletcher surprised her by producing a small carved wooden box from his belongings. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a small pendant in the shape of a star. "My mother's," he said as he helped her fasten it around her neck. "It's the only thing I have left of her. I want you to have it, Fiona. You've brought light back into my life, just like a star in the darkness." Fiona touched the pendant with trembling fingers, overwhelmed by the significance of the gift. "Fletcher, I can't take this. It's too precious." "You're precious to me," he said simply. "More precious than anything. Please keep it." That night, as they sat by the fire and sang old carols together, Fiona realized that she was no longer mourning the life she had lost. Instead, she was embracing the new life that was unfolding before her, full of possibility and hope and love. In January, Fletcher asked her to marry him. They were standing outside in the clear, cold morning, admiring the way the sun made the snow sparkle like diamonds, when he suddenly took both her hands in his and dropped to one knee. "Fiona Montgomery," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "I love you with everything I am. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, here in this mountain or anywhere else you want to go. I want to build a future with you, raise a family with you, grow old with you. Will you marry me?" Fiona felt her heart swell until it felt too big for her chest. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes, Fletcher, I will marry you. I love you so much." Fletcher stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her close as they both laughed and cried together. Then he kissed her, a sweet, tender kiss that spoke of promises and forever. And Fiona felt the last pieces of her broken heart knit themselves back together, made stronger by the joining. They were married in February on a clear, cold day when the snow sparkled under a brilliant blue sky. The preacher from Belmont rode up to perform the ceremony, along with a few of the townspeople who had gotten to know Fletcher during his trips down the mountain. It was a small, simple wedding held in the cabin that had brought them together, but it was perfect in every way that mattered. Fiona wore a dress of deep blue that Fletcher had bought for her in town, and she wore his mother's star pendant at her throat. Fletcher wore a new suit and a string tie, his hair neatly combed and his beard freshly trimmed. When he said his vows, his voice was strong and clear, promising to love and cherish her for all the days of his life. When Fiona said hers, she meant every word with a depth of feeling that would have seemed impossible just a few months before. After the ceremony, they celebrated with a feast that Fiona and some of the town women had prepared, and there was music and dancing and laughter that echoed through the mountain cabin. And that night, when their guests had left and they were finally alone as husband and wife, Fletcher carried Fiona over the threshold of their bedroom and loved her with a tenderness and passion that made her feel cherished and desired and completely whole. Spring came eventually, as it always does, melting the snow and bringing green back to the mountain meadows. Fletcher had been right about the amount of wood he had cut during that blizzard. They still had a substantial stack left even after the worst of winter had passed, a visible reminder of the day he had ridden into her life and changed everything. As the weather warmed, Fletcher began working on expanding their property. He built a larger barn for the horses and the milk cow he bought in Belmont. He cleared land for a garden and helped Fiona plant vegetables and herbs. He constructed a chicken coop and filled it with laying hens. Together, they turned the lonely mountain cabin into a thriving homestead, full of life and purpose and love. In June, Fiona realized she was pregnant. She told Fletcher one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. She had been nervous about how to share the news, but the moment she said the words, Fletcher let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around despite her laughing protests to be careful. "We're going to have a baby," he kept saying, his face alight with wonder and happiness. "Fiona, we're going to be parents. This is the best news I've ever received in my life." The pregnancy was smooth and uneventful, and Fletcher was attentive to Fiona's every need. He would not let her lift anything heavy or work too hard. He made sure she ate well and rested often. He talked to her growing belly every night, telling their unborn child stories and singing soft cowboy songs in his deep, rumbling voice. Their son was born in February, exactly 1 year after they had married, during another snowstorm that blanketed the mountains in white. Fletcher delivered the baby himself with steady hands and a calm demeanor that masked his inner terror, and when he placed the squalling infant in Fiona's arms, she saw tears streaming down his face. "He's perfect," Fletcher whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one calloused finger. "He's absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas Fletcher Whitman, honoring both Fiona's first husband and her second, acknowledging the past while celebrating the future. Little Tommy, as they called him, had his father's gray-green eyes and his mother's dark hair, and from the moment he was born, he was the center of their world. Fletcher proved to be a devoted father. He would walk the floor with Tommy when the baby cried at night, singing to him in that deep voice until he settled. He carved toys for his son, a rattle and a set of blocks, and eventually a small wooden horse. He talked to Tommy constantly, even when the baby was too young to understand, telling him about the ranch they would build together, the horses they would raise, the life they would create. Fiona watched her husband with their son and fell even more deeply in love with him, if that were possible. Fletcher had saved her life that winter day when he stopped to check on a cabin with no smoke rising from its chimney, but he had done so much more than that. He had given her a reason to live again, a future to look forward to, a family to love and cherish. 2 years later, their daughter was born, a tiny girl with Fletcher's strong features and Fiona's warm brown eyes. They named her Sarah Grace Whitman, and she was as different from her brother as could be, quiet where he was boisterous, thoughtful where he was impulsive. Fletcher loved her with a fierce protectiveness that made Fiona smile, and she often teased him about how he would never let any young man come courting when Sarah grew up. As the years passed, their homestead grew and prospered. Fletcher bought more land and built up a herd of cattle, running them in the mountain meadows during the summer and bringing them down to lower pastures in the winter. He hired a few hands to help with the work, and soon the little mountain cabin was the center of a successful ranching operation. They built a larger house, though Fiona insisted they keep the original cabin as well, preserved as a reminder of where their story had begun. The woodshed, too, remained, still containing some of the logs Fletcher had cut during that first blizzard. Fiona would not let him burn them. She wanted them there as a physical reminder of his sacrifice, his generosity, his love. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she would walk out to the shed and run her hand over those old logs, remembering the fear she had felt that cold December day when she had thought she might not survive the night, and the overwhelming relief and gratitude she had experienced when Fletcher Whitman had appeared like an answer to a prayer. Life was not always easy on the mountain ranch. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and difficult births, injuries and setbacks and disappointments. But through it all, Fletcher and Fiona faced everything together, their love providing a foundation strong enough to weather any storm. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Fletcher took Fiona back to the original cabin, which they had maintained and kept furnished over the years. He had prepared a surprise for her, cooking dinner himself and setting the table with candles and wildflowers. "I wanted to bring you back to where it all started," he said as they sat down to eat. "Do you remember that day, Fiona, when I rode up and found you freezing with no wood to burn?" "I remember every detail," Fiona said softly. "I remember thinking I was going to die, and then you appeared. I have never believed much in divine providence, but that day I could not help but feel that God had sent you to me." "I think maybe he did," Fletcher said, "because I could have taken any trail down from the high country that day. I could have passed by your cabin without stopping. But something made me choose that particular route. Something made me notice that your chimney was not smoking. Something made me stop to check on you. And that something changed my whole life." "It changed mine too," Fiona said, reaching across the table to take his hand. "You saved my life, Fletcher, not just that day by cutting wood for me, but in every day since. You saved me from loneliness and grief and despair. You gave me a reason to keep living, keep loving, keep hoping. You gave me a family and a home and a future. I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." Fletcher raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Fiona Whitman. Everything I am, everything I have, everything I hope to be, it's all because of you. I would cut wood for you every day for the rest of my life if that's what it took to keep you warm and safe and happy." "You already do," Fiona said with a smile. "Maybe not literally cutting wood every day, but you provide for me, you protect me, you care for me in 1,000 different ways. You are the best husband a woman could ask for and the best father our children could have." They spent that anniversary night in the cabin where they had first fallen in love, making love by firelight and talking until dawn about their memories and their dreams. And in the morning, when they walked back to the main house where their children were waiting with the housekeeper who had watched them overnight, Fiona paused at the woodshed and looked at those old logs one more time. "What are you thinking?" Fletcher asked, coming to stand beside her. I'm thinking that wood keeps us warm in more ways than one, Fiona said. The wood you cut that day kept me from freezing, yes, but it also brought you into my life. It gave us time together during that blizzard, time to talk and get to know each other and fall in love. Without that wood, without that storm, without your incredible generosity and hard work, none of this would exist. Our children would never have been born. This ranch would not be here. We would not be standing together like this, happy and in love after 10 years of marriage. Fletcher wrapped his arms around her from behind and rested his chin on the top of her head. Then, I guess, I cut the most important wood of my life that day. Not because it kept you alive through one winter, but because it gave us a lifetime together. Exactly, Fiona said, leaning back against him and feeling the solid strength of his body supporting hers. You chopped enough to last the winter, but what you really gave me was enough love to last forever. More years passed, bringing changes and challenges but also blessings beyond measure. Tommy grew into a strong, capable young man who loved ranching as much as his father did, and he worked alongside Fletcher every day, learning everything there was to know about raising cattle and horses in the Nevada mountains. Sarah proved to have a gift for healing, and Fiona taught her everything she knew about herbs and medicine, skills that Sarah used to help their family and neighbors whenever illness or injury struck. Fletcher's hair turned gray at the temples, and lines deepened around his eyes and mouth, but Fiona thought he only grew more handsome with age. She herself had changed too, her face showing the marks of years spent in the sun and wind, her hands made strong by work and motherhood. But when Fletcher looked at her, she saw the same love and desire in his eyes that had been there on their wedding night, and she knew that time had only deepened and strengthened the bond between them. They had 3 more children over the years, another son and 2 more daughters, and their home rang with laughter and noise and the beautiful chaos of family life. Fletcher was patient and loving with all of them, teaching the boys to ride and rope and work cattle, teaching the girls to be strong and independent while also nurturing their feminine gifts. He never raised his voice in anger, never lifted his hand in violence, never made his children feel anything but loved and valued. Fiona sometimes thought about Thomas, her first husband, and wondered what he would think of the life she had built. She liked to believe he would be happy for her, that he would approve of Fletcher and the way he cared for her. Thomas had been a good man, and he had loved her, but his time with her had been cut short by tragedy. Fletcher had been given the gift of time, and he had used every moment of it to love her well and faithfully. On their 20th anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration that lasted 3 days. Tommy, now 21 and courting a sweet girl from Belmont, gave a toast at the anniversary dinner, speaking about how his parents' love had been the foundation of his life and had taught him what kind of husband he wanted to be. Sarah, 19 and preparing to open a small clinic in town to serve the community, talked about how her father's strength and her mother's compassion had shaped her into the woman she was becoming. Fletcher and Fiona listened to their children's words with tears in their eyes, overwhelmed by the realization of how much they had built together. This was not just a ranch or a business or a piece of property. This was a legacy, a family, a testament to the power of love and commitment and hard work. Late that night, after the guests had gone home and the children had gone to bed, Fletcher and Fiona walked together up to the old cabin. It had been a few years since they had been inside, and they found it exactly as they had left it, preserved as a monument to their beginning. Fletcher lit a fire in the old stove, using wood from the stack he still maintained, and they sat together on the floor in front of it, just as they had done so many times during that first winter. "You ever regret it?" Fiona asked softly. Giving up your wandering life to stay here with me?" Fletcher looked at her in genuine surprise. "Regret it? Fiona, staying here with you was the best decision I ever made. Every good thing in my life came from that choice. My children, my home, my purpose, my happiness, all of it stems from the day I decided to stop running and start living. I have never regretted it for even a moment." "I'm glad," Fiona said, resting her head on his shoulder, "because I cannot imagine my life without you. You are woven into every part of me, every thought and feeling and dream. You are my best friend and my great love and my partner in all things." "And you are mine," Fletcher said, kissing the top of her head. "20 years ago, I was just a drifting cowboy with no roots and no home. Now I'm a husband, a father, a rancher, a member of a community. I'm a man with a purpose and a place and people who depend on me." "You gave me all of that, Fiona. You turned me from a wanderer into a man with a home." "We gave it to each other," Fiona corrected gently. "I needed you as much as you needed me, maybe more. I was dying up here, not just physically that day when I ran out of wood, but emotionally and spiritually. I had given up on life, on happiness, on the future. And then you rode up on your horse and reminded me that life goes on, that love is possible, that tomorrow can be better than today." They sat in silence for a while, watching the flames dance in the stove, each lost in their own memories and thoughts. Outside, the wind whispered through the pine trees, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The mountain was as beautiful and wild as it had been that day 20 years ago when Fletcher had first arrived, but it no longer felt lonely or threatening to Fiona. It felt like home. "I want to tell you something," Fletcher said eventually. "Something I have never told you before." Fiona lifted her head to look at him, seeing the serious expression on his face. "What is it?" "That day when I rode up and found your cabin with no smoke coming from the chimney, I had been planning to end my life," Fletcher said quietly. "I had been alone for so long, drifting from place to place with no purpose or direction. I was tired, Fiona. Tired of being alone, tired of having no roots, tired of watching other men build lives and families while I just kept moving. I had decided that after I got down to Belmont, I was going to drink myself to death or pick a fight with someone who would kill me. I was done." Fiona felt shock wash over her, followed by a deep, profound gratitude. "Fletcher," she whispered. "But then I saw your cabin," he continued. "And I saw that there was no smoke, and something in me said I needed to stop and check, needed to make sure whoever lived there was okay. And when you opened that door and I saw you standing there, shivering and desperate and trying so hard to be brave, something shifted inside me. Suddenly, I had a purpose again. Suddenly, there was a reason to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep living. You saved my life that day just as much as I saved yours." Fiona felt tears streaming down her face as she wrapped her arms around her husband, holding him as tightly as she could. "I'm so glad you stopped," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so glad you chose to check on me. I cannot bear to think about a world where you rode past my cabin, where you gave in to that darkness, and I never got to know you and love you." "It was meant to be," Fletcher said softly, holding her close. "All of it. The storm, the timing, the choices we both made, it was all leading us to each other, to this life we have built together." "I believe that," Fiona said. "I truly do." They held each other in front of the fire for a long time. Two souls who had found each other in the darkness and built a life full of light. And as the night deepened and the fire burned low, they made love there on the floor of the old cabin, celebrating 20 years of marriage with the same passion and tenderness that had marked their first night together. In the years that followed, Fletcher and Fiona watched their children grow and marry and start families of their own. Tommy took over more of the ranch operations, working side by side with his father to expand and improve the property. He married his sweetheart from Belmont, and they gave Fletcher and Fiona their first grandchildren, twin boys who had their grandfather's eyes and their grandmother's smile. Sarah opened her clinic and became known throughout the region as a gifted healer with a compassionate heart. She married a doctor from Austin who had come west seeking adventure, and together they built a medical practice that served people from all over central Nevada. The younger children found their own paths, some staying in Nevada and others venturing further afield, but all of them carrying with them the lessons and values their parents had instilled. They were hardworking and honest, compassionate and strong, and they made Fletcher and Fiona proud every single day. As they entered their 60s, Fletcher and Fiona began to slow down a bit, leaving more of the ranch work to Tommy and his brothers while they focused on enjoying their grandchildren and each other. They took to spending long afternoons on the porch of their house, rocking in chairs Fletcher had built, watching the sun set over the mountains and talking about everything and nothing. "You remember the exact moment you knew you loved me?" Fiona asked one evening as they sat together, her hand clasped in his. Fletcher thought for a moment, then smiled. "It was the second day I was here, during the blizzard. You were cooking dinner and you started humming this little tune while you worked. You were not even aware you were doing it, but it was the happiest sound I had heard in years. And I looked at you standing there at the stove in your patched dress with your hair coming loose from its pins, and I just knew. I knew I wanted to hear that sound every day for the rest of my life. I knew I had found my home." "That's beautiful," Fiona said softly. "For me, it was when you came in from cutting wood that first day, and your face was covered in sweat and snow, and you were exhausted, but you still smiled at me and said you would not rest until I was warm. I saw your kindness, your strength, your integrity all in that moment, and I knew you were someone special. I did not know yet that I loved you, but I knew I wanted to. And now here we are," Fletcher said, squeezing her hand. 35 years later, still sitting together, still talking, still in love. "Still in love," Fiona agreed. "Always in love." They celebrated their 40th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. For Tommy's eldest son had married young and already had a baby daughter. The party was held at the ranch, with tables set up under the trees and food enough to feed half of Belmont. There was music and dancing and speeches and laughter, and through it all, Fletcher and Fiona sat together holding hands, marveling at the family they had created and the life they had built. 40 years, Fiona said as they danced together to a slow, sweet waltz. 40 years since you chopped wood for a freezing woman in a cabin. Best wood I ever chopped, Fletcher said with a grin. Got me a wife, a family, a home, and a lifetime of happiness. I would say that was a pretty good return on a few days of hard work. A very good return indeed, Fiona agreed, resting her head against his chest and feeling the steady beat of his heart. I love you, Fletcher Whitman. I love you today as much as I loved you yesterday, and I will love you even more tomorrow. And I love you, Fiona Whitman, Fletcher said, holding her close as they swayed to the music. You are my heart, my home, my everything. You always have been and you always will be. As the sun set over the Nevada mountains that evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson and purple, Fletcher and Fiona stood together on the porch of their home, looking out over the land they had built together. The old cabin was still visible from here, preserved and maintained, a reminder of where their story had begun. The woodshed stood beside it, still containing a few of those original logs that Fletcher refused to let anyone burn. You think our grandchildren will understand? Fiona asked softly. When we are gone and they hear the story, Do you think they will understand how significant that wood was? They will understand that their grandfather saved their grandmother's life, Fletcher said. They will understand that sometimes love comes when you least expect it, in the middle of a blizzard, in the form of a stranger with an axe and a kind heart. They will understand that small acts of kindness can change everything, that generosity and hard work are the foundation of a good life, and that true love is worth fighting for and holding on to with everything you have. That's all I could hope for, Fiona said. That they remember the important things. They will, Fletcher assured her, because we have shown them every day how to love well, how to work hard, how to build something that lasts. Our legacy is not just this ranch or the money or the property. Our legacy is the example we have set, the love we have shared, the family we have raised. Fiona turned to face him, reaching up to cup his weathered, beloved face in her hands. You are still the man who saved my life, Fletcher. You are still my hero, my love, my everything. And I am still the luckiest woman in the world that you stopped at my cabin that day. I'm the lucky one, Fletcher said, kissing her forehead, then her cheeks, then her lips with a tenderness that made her heart melt just as it had 40 years ago. I'm the cowboy who found his home, his purpose, his reason for living, and I found it all in you. They stood together on the porch as darkness fell and the stars came out. Two people who had started as strangers and become soulmates. Two lives that had intertwined so completely that they could no longer imagine existing separately. Around them, the sounds of their family celebrating filled the night, children laughing and running, grandchildren playing, the next generation already creating memories of their own. And in the old cabin down the hill, the woodshed stood silent and strong, protecting the last of those logs that had been cut 40 years ago during a blizzard by a cowboy who had stopped to help a woman in need. They were just pieces of wood, cut and split and stacked, but they represented something far greater than fuel for a fire. They represented salvation and hope, and the beginning of a love story that had lasted a lifetime. Fletcher and Fiona lived to celebrate their 50th anniversary, their 60th, and finally their 65th. By then, they were both in their 80s, still living in the house on the mountain, still refusing to move to town despite their children's gentle urgings. The ranch was run entirely by Tommy and his sons now, but Fletcher still walked the property every day, checking fences and watching the cattle, unwilling to give up his connection to the land he loved. Fiona's health began to fail in her 87th year. It was nothing dramatic, just a gradual fading, a slow letting go. Fletcher tended to her with the same devotion he had shown for 65 years, sitting by her bedside, holding her hand, telling her stories about their life together. You remember the wood? Fiona asked one evening, her voice weak but her eyes still bright with love. I remember everything, Fletcher said softly. Every log I cut, every moment we spent together, every time you smiled at me. I remember it all, Fiona. It was good, was it not? She whispered. Our life together. It was good. It was the best, Fletcher said, tears streaming down his weathered face. It was more than I ever dreamed possible. You gave me everything, Fiona, everything that matters. And you gave me life, she said. Not just that day with the wood, but every day after. You were my second chance, my great love, my home. I have been so happy, Fletcher, so very, very happy. Rest now, he told her, kissing her forehead. Rest, my love, I'm here, I'll always be here. Fiona closed her eyes and squeezed his hand one last time. The wood, she murmured. You chopped enough to last the winter, but what you really gave me was enough love to last forever. She died peacefully in her sleep that night, surrounded by her family, holding the hand of the cowboy who had saved her life and loved her faithfully for 65 years. Fletcher held her long after she was gone, unable to let go, unwilling to accept that their time together had come to an end. But eventually, gently, his children helped him release her hand and say goodbye. They buried her on the mountain she had loved, in a spot overlooking the valley with a view of the old cabin where their story had begun. And Fletcher stood at her graveside and made her one final promise. "I'll take care of the wood," he said quietly. "I'll make sure those last logs are preserved. I'll make sure everyone knows the story of how we met, how we loved, how we built this life together. I'll make sure our great-great-grandchildren know that love is real and worth everything, that kindness matters, that a simple act of generosity can change the world. I promise, Fiona, I promise." Fletcher lived for 2 more years after Fiona passed, and he spent those years doing exactly what he had promised. He told the story of the wood to anyone who would listen, ensuring that the family history was preserved. He wrote it all down in a leather-bound journal that he gave to Tommy, instructing him to pass it down through the generations. He maintained the cabin and the woodshed with meticulous care, making sure they would stand for decades to come. And on quiet evenings, he would sit in the cabin by himself, building a small fire in the old stove and remembering the blizzard, the fear in Fiona's eyes, the sound of his axe ringing through the frozen air, the moment he had known his wandering days were over. When Fletcher died in his 90th year, peacefully in his sleep, just as Fiona had, the family buried him beside her on the mountain. And at the funeral, Tommy stood before the gathering and told the story one more time, the story of how his father had saved his mother's life by chopping wood during a blizzard, and how that act of kindness had blossomed into a love that had lasted 65 years and created a family that now numbered over 100 people. "My father once told me," Tommy said, his voice breaking with emotion, "that he chopped enough wood to last the winter, but what he really gave my mother was enough love to last forever. That's the legacy he left us, all of us. Not the ranch or the money or the property, though those things are valuable, but the example of what real love looks like, what commitment means, what it takes to build something that endures. That's what we inherit from Fletcher and Fiona Whitman. That's what we carry forward." The cabin and the woodshed still stand today, preserved by the family as a monument to Fletcher and Fiona's love. Inside the shed, behind glass now to protect them from the elements, are the last few logs from that original stack, the wood that Fletcher cut during the blizzard of 1875 when he saved a freezing woman's life and found his own destiny. Visitors come from all over to see the cabin and hear the story, drawn by the romance of it, the simplicity of it, the truth of it. They stand in the small room where Fletcher and Fiona fell in love. They look at the stove that he fired up to warm her, and they walk to the woodshed where those old logs rest behind glass like precious relics. And on the glass is a small plaque, placed there by the family, with words that Tommy chose carefully to honor his parents' memory. In December 1875, Fletcher Whitman stopped at this cabin to help a woman who was freezing with no wood to burn. He chopped enough to last the winter, but what he really gave her was a lifetime of love, a family of over 100 descendants, and a story that will be told forever. This is where kindness became love, where strangers became family, where a simple act of generosity changed the world. This is where it all began. And so the story lives on, passed down through generations, a testament to the power of compassion, the beauty of love, and the remarkable truth that sometimes, in the middle of a blizzard, a stranger with an axe can become the answer to every prayer you never knew how to pray.